professors, distinguished guests, Abbot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fifth session, the fifth roundtable of the conference, which I'm very happy to witness. That triggers a very constructive, fertile, and vibrant dialogue with very interesting conclusions that we must use. This roundtable will be co-moderated by the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and myself. The topic is the position of the Christian values, if any, in day-to-day political life. In other words, participants are urged to explore and present to us the values of our Christian identity that are reflected on political thinking and acting, and how the notion of politics was born in the ancient polis, a city-state that thrived in ancient Greece. And the roots, the stem of politics is no accident. Governance was born in organized communities and then states. However, in ancient Greece, the notion of governance took on a more comprehensive form as the model became the good citizen who actively participates and contributes to the prosperity, harmony, and security of the city, as opposed to the private individual, the so-called idiot. Soon, however, the city-state declines, replaced by the Hellenistic kingdoms and the Roman Empire. The content of polis changes. There's no more public political activity. However, the flourishing of a number of philosophical currents, Stoics, Epicureans, and so on, witnesses the success of the city-state. Christianity engages in a titanic, a gigantic missionary work, and they resist martyrdom because the freedom values more than oppression. Since Constantine, Christianity becomes the official religion and influences the politics of the Eastern Empire, as it would do everywhere where Christianity spread. The polis has left its mark on all sorts of political formations that tended to have a religious expression. Since Enlightenment, particularly after the French Revolution, Christian values are targeted. The new model that emerges is secularization and the separation between church and politics. New currents in the European continent will attempt to sever the roots with Christian tradition. In Eastern and Central Europe, Christian faith is almost outlawed in certain cases. These regimes collapsed. We all hoped that Christian values that were never lost among these peoples would be reborn in Europe. We believed that the key principles of the common European Christian tradition could become fertile elements of the European ideology, a counterbalance to this materialistic, economistic model. I think that was the expectation of the founders of the International Assembly on Orthodoxy, Mr. Migdalis, for the Orthodox world to promote its own characteristics into the new European edifice. European Union was founded by the leaders of Christian democratic parties in Western Europe, guided by Christian values. However, developments were not as expected. The trend for religious faith to be strictly restricted in the private sphere is overwhelming. At least on a Central European level, there is no room even to discuss Christian values. On a national level, however, this is still a matter of debate, more or less intense, depending on every country's tradition, as happened recently in Greece on same-sex marriage. The Christian values on the nature and the role of the nuclear family was the main topic of debate between politicians and the public. The opponents of Christian values also state that such values are obscurantist, belong to the Middle Ages, they're reactionary. So, they should be condemned a priori. Any politician defending Christian values, dear colleagues, is thought to be retrogressive or willing to exploit the support of the church or the faithful. So the politician's right to defend their beliefs is questioned. It's high time, I think, to clarify things, revisit the relations between Christian values and politics, by extension the relations between ethics and politicians in the context of a strong, united Europe. I trust that this roundtable will shed light on many aspects of this issue. It includes a number of distinguished speakers, and it's an honor to have them with us. Allow me to introduce our panelists. I'd like to welcome the member of the International Assembly on Orthodoxy, member of the House of Representatives of Cyprus, candidate MEP, Mr. Ilias Mirianthous. Professor, former member of the European Parliament, distinguished expert in constitutional law, Mr. Konstantinos Chrysogonos. Our host, Professor Nikos Magioros, head of the School of Theology. Reverend Thomas Wipf, President of the European Council of Religious Leaders, Religions for Peace. A Greek coming from Larissa, as I do, a good friend, a member of the European Parliament, a candidate MEP again, Ms. Maria Spiraki, and Mr. Spiros Papas, former General Director of the European Commission. So this exquisite panel will be co-moderated by the Dean of the Faculty of Theology, Professor Chrysostomos Stamoulis. Dean, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Let me welcome once again the participants today on a Friday morning. We have the pleasure to be welcoming new speakers, many of whom are dear friends. Christian values and day-to-day political life, truths, obstacles, and dependencies. A couple of words as a follow-up to my address on the first day. I insisted on the need to distinguish between public, private, and state. In the past, in sociology and politics, the distinction used to be only between state and private. There was no public square. And this caused a number of problems. The religious event, churches and communities of faith had either to belong to the state arena with all this entails or limit themselves within the private sphere. We ought to say, however, that religious life since ancient times is a way of living that belongs to the public square, to the public sphere, and no one can lead communities of faith outside the public sphere, in the sense that there can be no individual presence without collective presence in the public sphere. Can be no ban on collective presence and expression. Should be understood always against the distinction between state and public. Christianity was born at the heart of the city. Christ was not born in the desert. In ancient Greece, the ecclesia of the demos lied at the heart of the city and determined the formation of polis, the city. I tend to speak of a culture of sarcoses. We speak about Greek Orthodox cultures, Serb Orthodox cultures, and so on. And this is true because local churches always draw characteristics from local cultures, language, art, means of expression, so that they can express themselves. But there's a culture that transcends those local cultures, and that could be named the culture of sarcosis. Two are its main characteristics. Cenosis, Christ, without abandoning his divine nature, continues to act as a man, emptying himself of certainties rather, and promoting existence. Such a culture in our European family is accepted initially in the framework of the Orthodox Church, across Christianity as a fact of faith, and later transcends this and reaches out all over the world to people who can accept the outcomes of such a culture without necessarily believing. Christianity goes beyond faith because love, solidarity, freedom, respect, dignity are issues that are relevant for the entire humanity. In addition to those, apart from those rather, who take fundamentalist stances and violence. Can be no fundamentalist without violence. I'm talking about all forms of violence, not just physical, but also verbal. And also the violence of absence. So fundamentalism is the new barbarity. Who can be an obstacle to this new barbarity? Who can prevent its spread? I wouldn't say Christianity only, but it's a first obstacle to this new barbarism, this new fascism we experience both within Christianity and Orthodoxy and our culture overall. And one last point. The Christians of the world cannot turn a blind eye when right next to us there are places like in the East right now that are being devastated, where human nature, freedom, dignity and respect are all dismantled. We can begin, Mr. Harakopoulos. Thank you, Dean. I guess we're all here to listen to the panelists, not the moderators. And let me start with Mr. Ilias Myrianthous for his presentation, Member of the House of Parliament of Cyprus and candidate MEP. Mr. Myrianthous, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Charakopoulos. Distinguished guests, dear participants, dear Abbot. The theme of this conference is extremely important and relevant, considering that many European citizens, guided by Christian ideals and values, do not see their views represented on the Union level. This is a paradox, given that the European Parliament is a representative and virtually legislative institution of the European Union, which ought to ensure diversity of views and ideological pluralism of European societies. This pluralism is not static, nor should it be taken for granted. We need to fight for its genuine expression on a daily basis. The reasons for this attitude can be found in views that have been stated in the meetings and the proceedings of the I.A.O. over time. It is true that political formations on a national and European level are overwhelmed by dozens of priority matters triggered by international and domestic developments. At the same time, they have to deal with a volume of information which is hard to manage, let alone deal with misinformation or the so-called fake news. Therefore, in their day-to-day work, they have to express views and make decisions on urgent topical issues within very tight time limits, usually in fear of uncertainty caused by overwhelming information. So there's a trend to avoid addressing issues they don't know enough about or are viewed as potentially displeasing for other organizations or culture, as is the issue of Christian values. This trend becomes increasingly visible in the European Union, kindled by an impersonal, bureaucratic core of technocrats who believe that in this way they will limit the supposedly toxic effect of the religious realm. Thus, European bureaucracy uses distorted arguments in order to convince politicians dealing with European affairs that religious values are synonymous to religious faith, disregarding the fact that the values generated in the religious realm, particularly the wealthy Christian realm with its social history, belong to the history of humanity as a whole. The widespread identification of religious citizens and practitioners with persons who believe in the contribution of Christian values to a secularized environment is arbitrary and anti-democratic to the extent that it violates the right to self-determination. They are not mutually exclusive, but they shouldn't be merged indiscriminately. Such woke practices lead to anti-democratic and very dangerous implications because they are developed in the absence of political groups and figures. Some bureaucrats seem incapable of understanding that Christian values and democratic dialogue between religions, as well as the condemnation of all forms of violence or religious intolerance, are the pillars of a contemporary European reality. Well, the IPU seems to understand this fully. Christian values belong to democracy and society, and their exclusion from dialogue results in the exclusion of those who see Christian values as pillars of the society of the future. Our conference underscores this trend, also in the case of the dialogue on the future of Europe, where no reference to Christian values and the Christian identity of European peoples is made. What's worse, organizations and individuals who pursue who are in favor of understanding the importance of Christian values, recognizing them and their contribution they can have in shaping the European future, apparently were not invited to participate. It is true that the final report of the Conference on the Future of Europe says nothing about all that. The report was welcomed without any debate at the European Parliament or the Commission, in absentia of political groups and the Member States. Such practices, however, reinforce the anti-European arguments of Eurosceptics groups and reinforce phenomena of neo-nationalism in the national and the European arena. They also make people turn to their historical roots to search for models, although these may have nothing to do with the present and the future of Europe. To conclude, let me underline that politicians should strive daily to reinforce parliamentary discourse, not only formally through parliamentary representation, but also through direct democracy structures. One such example could be setting up ad hoc groups with the participation of citizens to facilitate consultation. Citizens will have the opportunity there to discuss with their parliamentary representatives their views. Parliamentarism should be an area that is open and inclusive, and this is an acquis we need to safeguard. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miriados. What I take from your presentation is that the exclusion of Christian values from the debate on the future of Europe widens the gap between European citizens who are religious or consider that Christian values co-shape the European culture and the European bureaucrats. I know that candidate MEPs have a very heavy agenda, and it's an honor to see you devote part of your time to the conference in the run-up to the election. I would suggest that we give them the floor first. Let me give the floor then to Ms. Maria Spiraki and then to Mr. Chrysogonos.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor to participate in this important conference. Dear colleagues, deputies, dear Maximus Abbot, Dean, it is a great pleasure to be here, and in fact it's important because there are other doctrines represented. I have met the same people when we visited the Vatican, and I think we should start our debate where Mr. Stamoulis ended, that we come without any certainties and we try to find a common ground so that each one of us can listen to the truth of the other. It was important to have this meeting in the Vatican, and we discussed the fact that an exchange of views should be out in the open and in the public. I am one of those politicians who believe that faith is a dynamic field of mutual influence where the basic principles of Christianity are involved. And this was incorporated with repercussions, of course, with the dependencies and obstacles and impediments. But since with the Edict of Caracalla, who gave Roman citizenship to all, and the Edict of Milan, our movement is works in parallel because state and church form societies. And any changes in terms of doctrine, the Reformed Church involved and influenced democratic principles, ideals, and human rights. And in the U.S. also, where they wanted a separation of church and state, the Christian ideals were very more important. You can see it in Abraham Lincoln, in Martin Luther King Jr. They're the roots of Christian morality and ethics. So the roots exist because we exist, and they are interwoven in our existence. From social justice and protection of the vulnerable, the need to care for those who are weak, and also how we define political speech. The sacredness of life. In Europe, we don't have the death penalty because life is the supreme good. There are many discussions on abortion or euthanasia, but dignity of life is important. It's the very root of Christian ethics. The family is a political view, whether it is marriage, education, or social welfare. And we can discuss same-sex marriage or parental rights in education, but the basis are Christian values. Social justice is a major Christian value. And starting with Rome, Pope Francis, who supported economic justice and policies that deal with imbalances, social cohesion, in other words. And this was a request of the primate of the Roman Catholic Church. And the ecumenical patriarch has been an outspoken critic of injustices and of religious persecution. Each man has been created in image and in likeness and deserves respect, and otherness also deserves respect. We have a sort of bipolar thing on secularization or theocracy. But no one can deal that in modern democracies we need universal policies of protecting the weak and the vulnerable, and we have different views among doctrines, but on the whole, religious freedom and the roots of modern Western democracy emanates from Christianity. Because decision-taking must have a moral ground. And when I speak of moral ground, I mean compassion, dignity, mercy. Social cohesion is one of the pillars of the European Union, and Christ himself showed us love for our neighbor. So we need to have social justice as a shelter and refuge for the weak, and this is also inherited from Christianity. There is a question of dependencies between church and state. There is a discussion of religious pluralism, and whether we should have a religious tolerance or dominant religion as we have in Greece. But there are also certain addictions. There is moralism that need to have some politicians as ambassadors of morality. There is also political exploitation when faith is identified with politics, and we have people in our national parliament and candidates for the European Parliament, and I want to be very clear. We are made of the same flesh. We follow the same course. No one can delete Christianity from the European identity. No one can delete the progress democracy has made and the respect of the European Union for minority rights and equality. And Europe is not simply bureaucracy, it's also politics, and it's the politicians that like the European Parliament, who is directly elected, and finally the decisions are not bureaucrats, the decisions are made by political institutions.